Hey everyone, God bless you and best wishes for a glorious feast of the three holy hierarchs, Saints Basil the Great, Gregory the Theologian, and John Chrysostom, whose feast we keep today on the 30th of January. What a beautiful climax to an incredible month of feasts. You know that I have been, in the last few reflections, focusing upon the role of medicine in the Christian life. We began by discussing medicine in moderation. We then talked about medical asceticism and the parallel between taking the necessary actions to be physically healthy and the even more important decision to take the necessary actions to be spiritually healthy. This week, in response to those videos, I've received quite a few communications. PNP received them and passed them on to me about how exactly to do that. Many have shared with me that they found themselves, don't we all, found themselves in my description from St. Basil the Great about how we often care for the body too much, and not enough for the soul. And I was asked, where should I start? How do I find out about my spiritual diseases, both their origins, their nature, and their cures? Because all three of those questions are extremely important. Where do our spiritual diseases come from? Exactly what are they like? How do we detect them in their manifestation in our spiritual lives? And how do we cure them? This is the subject. And does the church have a rich resource in answer to that question? I'm so glad that it was posed to me. And I'd like to make a few suggestions on how to cure your spiritual diseases. That's my theme today. How to cure your spiritual diseases. The first thing I would say is that the resources are greatly rich in their nature and multitudinous and available. But of course, you're not going to be finding them except in the church, because like so many things, there's only one entity on the face of planet Earth telling the truth these days about the most important matters, and that would be the Church of our Lord Jesus Christ. Resources are extremely important, and to have counsel from a well-informed and a well-formed confessor is extremely important. Just think of it in the physical realm, how important a well-educated doctor is. You know, there's such a thing as malpractice, when doctors fail in their sacred duties to be prepared and to treat diseases properly. There's also a parallel in the spiritual world, in the ecclesial world, of spiritual malpractice, where father confessors do not do the work necessary to understand diseases and therefore and their proper cure, and therefore give counsel that is not helpful and sometimes positively destructive. That's spiritual malpractice, and it exists. It's a horrible reality, just like physical medical malpractice is a horrible reality. You need to have a competent, disciplined, hardworking confessor. That's the bottom line, and that's what confessors are called to be, of course. I recently went to the orthopedic physician because I have a problem in my right elbow. Ever since I was a little boy, I was a baseball player and a pitcher when I was young, and I threw lots of pitches too early, the kind of pitches I should never have been throwing, curveballs and the like. And unfortunately, I did damage to my elbow and partially detached my tendon. The result of that, as I've grown old now, and I'm in my mid-50s, is that I have pretty much constant pain in that elbow, and sometimes just outrageous tendinitis. Thank God I have a wonderful orthopedic physician who has been taking care of me, not just giving me occasional cortisone shots and other types of treatments, but evaluating very closely the literature on this subject. So for instance, I went to see him recently after I had tried acupuncture. I had tried 4 rounds of acupuncture. Wasn't very successful due to the type of injury that I had, but I was very happy to hear my doctor, a shout out to you, Dr. Eric, explain to me that he had been reading the material on this subject and the studies with regards to the the success rate of acupuncture for this kind of thing. And he said it works better in this kind of disease and not so much in this kind of disease. And I'll tell you, that was extremely comforting to know how serious he is about his profession and providing the best care to me that he possibly can. And that is exactly how we priests should be. Physical doctors, medical doctors are constantly engaged in state mandated and medical association mandated continuing education. And we priests also are committed to continuing our education and constantly submersing ourselves in the Holy Scriptures, in the lives of the saints, and in the sacred literature of the church, the patristic literature, which is front and center about how to cure our spiritual diseases. The heart of patristic literature, of course, is material on who is God, and following that very closely behind is who is man, what has happened to man, and how has Christ come to save man. These themes constitute this very subject that we're addressing, which is the curing of our spiritual diseases. So becoming more aware of the church's literature on the subject, the most important subject of our spiritual diseases, is exactly what we should do. And especially to have a confessor who is himself thoroughly committed to this. You know, St. Paul said, let all the priests be held in honor, but especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. We have to be good physicians of the soul and work constantly at improving our knowledge, both in experience and by prayer and by study, so that we can help our people discern the origin of spiritual diseases, the nature of them, and the cure of them. If you are hoping and wanting to read, as I hope you are, to want to read more about your own spiritual challenges, I would make a few suggestions. First, I would suggest a marvelous text that all Orthodox Christians know, because we commit the fourth Sunday of Great Lent to St. John of Sinai and his marvelous text, the Ladder of Divine Ascent. The Ladder is a precious volume that addresses very concretely the nature of our spiritual diseases and how to overcome it. So, for instance, chapters 14 and 15 on gluttony and lust. These are two major diseases that afflict us and burden us, and St. John, in a masterful way, unpacks the origin, nature, and cure of those diseases. So, first, St. John of Sinai's The Ladder. I would also suggest St. John Cassian's Institutes, his Institutes. This short book in 12 small chapters, the last 8 chapters are dedicated to the cure of 8 of the primary vices or particular diseases. I think that St. John Cassian's Institutes are precious, absolutely precious. I would also recommend reading the Evergetinos. This is the collection of the sayings of the Desert Fathers. And in the Eastern tradition, in the Orthodox tradition, in comparison or contrast rather with often how the Desert Fathers are collected in the West, we collect them according to hypotheses or themes. So you can look in the 4 volumes of the Evergetinos, you can look through the table of contest for the subject of your particular struggle. You can find a chapter, there's 200 of them, 50 per volume in 4 volumes, that deal with the whole range of spiritual life. And lastly, I would recommend St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountains, a handbook on spiritual counsels. Now, this marvelous text approaches the matter of spiritual disease from the spiritual senses. So there are physical senses, and then there are the comparable spiritual senses. And St. Nicodemus addresses on how to purify your vision, for instance, how to purify your touch and your taste and your hearing, and to Christianize our senses, our fallen spiritual senses, the senses of our soul. So those are some great resources. I wouldn't get them all and start reading right away, but why not one? Why not get ready for Great Lent this year by securing one of those volumes, dear ones, and committing yourself to read a little bit at a time, to identify what is really troubling you and to give your attention to that. You know, priests who have been priests for any significant period of time, we often collect material like this. On my computer, I have files, anger file, lust file, etc., that have their PDFs and other reflections by priests and bishops and scholars of the church. saints of the church that we can distribute to parishioners. And it's wonderful for priests, for confessors and spiritual fathers to give this kind of content direction to their spiritual children. But it's also wonderful for the spiritual children to be reading the material constantly themselves. And this is what I'm encouraging you to do. If you'd like to know more, or if you'd like to hear me lecture on this subject more, on PNP you can find a 10 lecture series called The Church as a Spiritual Hospital. The last 6 of those lectures, the first 4 lectures are dedicated to the nature of the church as a spiritual hospital. But the last 6 lectures are taking one spiritual disease at a time and unpacking it. I think you can find edifying material there. And then our recent series on the cardinal virtues will take it from the perspective of the virtue. Instead of examining the vice, its origin, nature, and expression and cure, the cardinal virtues will take the corresponding virtue and examine it that way. So hopefully you'll find some nourishment for your souls and some healing. God be with you.
Patristic Nectar Publications is pleased to present a new 5-lecture series entitled Contemporary Women Saints. St. John of Sinai, in his Ladder of Divine Ascent, writes that the lives of the saints arouse us to emulation of their courage and lead us to the virtue of humility and compunction. Contemporary saints are particularly important since they acquired their love for God and holiness in the midst of our current milieu and demonstrate that spiritual acquisition is possible even in our own troubled times.
For these and other available titles, please visit our website at patristicnectar.org.